Hi, I'm Annette Benedict. I'm a special education teacher for Storm Lake Elementary and a graduate student at Morningside College. This is my research presentation on the effects of press phonics interventions in fourth grade special education students with reading deficiencies. In the United States, according to the nation's report card, there's a lack of literacy skills. 64% of fourth graders are performing below proficiency in reading, which is alarming in and of itself. Then when I think about my special education students, and 66% of students with disabilities scored below basic compared to 26% who were not identified as having disabilities. Those alarming statistics led me to do my research in reading. Specifically, I chose the press intervention system because it was adopted by our administration for use with our at-risk and our title kids, and I wanted to see if it would also benefit my special education students. Literacy is a life skill. As educators, we know that the lack of reading proficiency has immediate effects and long-lasting effects. So struggling readers, if they're missing their automaticity and the ability to decode words, they're using their mental resources to try to decode the text instead of being able to apply their knowledge to comprehend. And then that lack of automaticity follows them as they go through the upper grades and they encounter increasingly complex texts and they're spending too much time trying to decode the text and then they don't have the time or they're too frustrated then to try and understand what it is they're actually reading the text for. Historically, the differences in teaching methods for students in special ed um, they've been different than the methods used for students in gen ed, such as memorizing word list in isolation and sight word. But the theory of bottom-up processing really hypothesizes that in order to become a fluent reader in both accuracy and in comprehension, you really have to know the parts of language first before you can progress to text meaning. So research has also shown that students with learning disabilities benefit from reading instruction that's explicit and intensive and systematic, and that type of instruction is specifically recommended for struggling readers by the Institute of Educational Sciences. Press Interventions is that type of program. It's explicit. It goes through actually the 5 crucial areas identified by the National Early Literacy Panel, starting with phonemic awareness, moving to phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and then comprehension. It goes in a step-by-step process that is very strategic and laid out and explicit. So the potential impact is that studies have shown students who were taught to decode versus those who were taught in more traditional methods of special ed, such as memorizing word lists, outscored their peers when they were required to apply their skills to text. So that research-based instruction in that area of phonemic awareness and phonics has been shown to be beneficial for all students, regardless of if they have a disability identified or not. So there's quite a bit of research on phonics and phonemic awareness in the lower elementary that has shown with younger students that it does close that achievement gap. But the gap in research really is once kids hit fourth grade and above, really specifically even fourth and fifth grade, is that phonics intervention still effective for them? And if it's not, then what is the most effective research-based intervention for those upper elementary students? So my research question really can explicit phonics interventions close that achievement gap for my upper elementary students who are identified as special education students? And the purpose of the study was really to determine then if their fluency scores would increase given that intensive systematic explicit phonics intervention. And the results, the impact this could have really is to help teachers and other researchers make instructional decisions about what type of instruction to use with special education students, specifically in the upper elementary level, and also to use a research-based program like PRESS that's recommended, but we know that not all interventions are effective for all students. So even though it is a research-based program, doing increased research on it in order to see, is it going to be effective for all students, even special education students? Is it going to reach a variety of needs? My methodology, I chose the A-B design, single subject, because of my availability of participants. I had 8 that fit into my study design, 3 females and 5 males. In my A-B design, the independent variable is the use of the press interventions, and the dependent variable was the student assessment results through the CBMR. And I couldn't do an A-B design due to the constraints of IEPs. I cannot withhold instruction from my special education students, so I had to stick with the A-B design. My students were predominantly low SES students. All of them had special education goals in reading. I had 6 of the 8 were ELL students, meaning they were not considered proficient in English. 2 students with behavior goals, and 1 student with a hearing loss with that has hearing aids as well as an FM system. The materials were the press reading interventions that came with the intervention program, so the intervention manual, the assessment manual, and then decodable literature that I found on my own to supplement in order to generalize skills into text. I also used the FastBridge CBMR, and that's the 3 short grade level passages on a variety of topics, and then the median score is what is used to assess or used as the score that to score the students. So the use of fast CBMR is pretty popular, especially in across Iowa, because it's reliable in its performance level score, in its slope, because of the validity of the performance level score and the predictive validity of the slope of improvement, just meaning that it is considered an adequate measure of fluency. So I began my research by using a decoding inventory. This is an example of the letter sound correspondence. All my students passed this. They got at least 21 of the sounds of the alphabet correctly in order to move on to the short vowel CVC words. Then they would read the words across, and I would make note of where they were making mistakes. If they got at least 9 right, they moved on to the digraphs. All of my students either fell out in short vowels and CVC words or the digraphs with short vowels. And then I grouped them according to these results. We met 5 days a week for 15 minutes each. I would go over the objectives, check to make sure they understood, model the activity, give them guided practice with specific feedback, such as, today we're learning the short vowel A. The short vowel A says ah in this word. At, you hear the short vowel in the middle of the sound. And then the independent practice was with those decodable texts to generalize the skills. I collected the baseline treatment with the CBMR at the beginning and the treatment data at the end, also using the CBMR. And then I used the paired samples t-test to analyze the data at the end using the JASP program. Unfortunately, my hypothesis that students eligible for special ed interventions in the area of reading will improve their fluency scores when given intensive, systematic, and explicit press phonics interventions the hypothesis was not confirmed. As you can see from the results, the students did not significantly increase their fluency scores on the post-test. If you look at the mean of the baseline at 50.88, and then the mean of the treatment at 57.88, you do see that they grew 7 words. But if you notice the p-value of 0.052, that is not a statistically significant growth. The standard deviation is also quite large, which I will address in my limitation section. This is my figure, again, showing a small growth there from baseline to treatment, a large standard of error, and the growth not being statistically significant. So what did I learn? The main takeaway is that collecting data on response to intervention is really the only way to know if an intervention is effective. So PRESS is a research-based intervention, but using it with my students and collecting that data was a vital part for me as an educator to know, is this a good choice for my own students? Also, interventionists need to be trained. If an intervention system is not utilized appropriately or consistently, it's not going to get the desired results. And the effectiveness of interventions varies. So when working with special education students, especially what is effective for one student may not be effective for another. In my study, I had one student gain 23 words correct per minute in the study in the 10 weeks, and I had one student who had 3 less words correct per minute at the end than at the beginning. And also, accelerating student achievement in reading requires more than just targeted phonics interventions. So I feel like the results from my study add to the body of research that the theory of bottom-up processing may indeed be effective for some students, but the study was not long enough to get conclusive evidence to show that that it is or isn't the only or one of the ways to really make a big difference with student achievement. Limitations and recommendations. So we had a delayed start in the use of our online data system due to issues with the rollout, plus several interruptions. Then I had to push my study back. We had several days early outs and then days off. So future studies could be planned at a more convenient time, not at the beginning of the school year when the schedule's still kind of up in the air. Also, future studies need to be longer. Bottom-up processing theory hypothesizes that automaticity in decoding then leads to fluency and then leads to comprehension. The study was not long enough to see if that is indeed true. The sample size was another issue limitation, with only 8 participants who fit the study criteria. There was a large standard of error in my baseline and treatment data. I had some students 1 grade level below up to 3 grade levels below, a student reading 20 words per minute at the beginning and a student reading 100 words per minute at the beginning. And I had to group them into 2 groups, which was very difficult because their beginning scores weren't even that comparable. This type of study would also benefit from the use of a control group. Implementation fidelity is a big part of the study that I think in the future researchers and interventionists should be trained in the interventions that they are giving. In my case, I was not trained in the intervention until actually a month ago. And while I felt I was implementing it with fidelity at the time, once I was actually trained in how to do it, I learned a lot of different aspects of the program that made me think about how I could have been even more effective in my interventions. And then just decreasing those external influences as much as possible with behavior and motivation, especially 2 students with behavior goals, and then an additional student who joined in the middle of our research, which I didn't collect data on him, but he did change the climate of my group significantly. And I realized that some of those things cannot be changed. That's education. But in order to get the best results, trying to decrease those outside influences as much as possible would be helpful for research. So in conclusion, I had a couple additional questions. Does success with a particular intervention vary based on how students are grouped? Again, going back to those comparable groups that I felt like I lacked in my study, if I had more comparable students to start with, how would that have affected my intervention? Also, what is the correlation between successful interventions and the consistency with which they are implemented? Again, going back to that consistency of dates and times and the people giving the interventions and the people in the groups, if all of that can remain more constant, how much of an impact would that have had on my study? In conclusion, I hope you enjoyed learning about my research in the area of press reading interventions in students with fourth grade. And despite my results, I was happy with the information I gained from implementing this research project. And I'm planning to use the results to help me make informed decisions for my students in the future and then to continue to advocate for all students. Thank you for watching.